Hi everyone, my name is Michał Sornat and I am the founder of UCreate. Today I'm gonna be showing you how you can use our newest asset pack for the Unreal Engine to create your own environment. I'm gonna walk you through the process of creating a height map for the landscape in Gaea, and later on I'm gonna show you how to quickly generate a procedural jungle forest, as well as share some tips along the way. Today's tutorial has a bit more lengthy format because I will walk you through the process step by step without any shortcuts, so you shouldn't feel disoriented at any point. So, I invite you to just sit back and enjoy. Let's get starting. Alright, so the first step in creating your own tropical island would be to generate a height map. You can of course also sculpt your own terrain inside Unreal, but this is the way we are gonna approach this today. I will show you how to do it in Gaea, but of course you can use other software, you can buy a height map on the marketplace. But Gaea is, in my opinion, a really cool, intuitive and quite easy way and fast way for creating a nice terrain. So I'm gonna walk you through the setup I already created for this island. It's the same island as the one you can find in the example level of the pack. So I'm not gonna explain so much. I don't want this to be a Gaea specific tutorial, but I'm just gonna share with you my own workflow, and hopefully this will give you enough confidence to create your own terrain. And also, if you are wondering if I can download this Gaea file, yes, you can. Just go into the description of this video and I will include it over there. Alright, so Gaea has a node-based workflow, as you can see, and you can access all the nodes on the panel on the left. And if you hover onto any one of them, you'll see a little pop-up with the short description what the node is basically doing. And we have a few categories like primitives and geoprimitives, which are generating a base, shapes, and then basically all of the rest of the settings are a way of manipulating those shapes. That's a very simplistic summary of how it all works. So anyway, let's take a look at the setup. So first, I started with the simple mountain node, and you can access the nodes by hitting tab, and in the search bar you can type mountain or whatever. So to not bore you so much, let's create something slightly different based on the current setup. So each node has a property window on the right, so you can change the scale, edge, height, type of the mountain. But let's stick with the sea and just change the seed to something different. Let's see. Maybe I want something soft as the base. Maybe this will work. And then, as the second layer, which will add some complexity, I use this drift noise. And I believe those are just the default settings that comes with this node, but you can of course change it. And then I plug it into the thermal shaper, which has this kind of a melting property. So if we see the comparison, it will make the shape a little bit more soft, maybe more natural. So then if we use the combine node, which is really handy tool, we'll see we have a mountain and our additional noise. And with the blending method or combine method, I use embedded with high ratio. And the next step would be to probably erode it so that the terrain will look more natural. So I used this wizard erosion, but you can also type erosion, and you can use this node, which is a little bit more complex and gives you more control. But for just the generic soft erosion, I use this one, and again, I guess I didn't change the settings. So that's that. And another node, it's called rugged, which adds even more complexity and I guess ruggedness. And the really interesting thing here is the thermal erosion, which will nicely flatten the terrain and gives us only the part which is more steep, which is perfect for creating an island. And this is already looking pretty good. But let's take it even further, and next step is combining of those two layers in a way that leaves the terrain flat only on the edges. And to achieve that, I use the mask. If you open up the properties of the mask, you can click on the edit mask and just paint the mask however you like. So over here you'll paint the edges of the island and then plug it into the combine node as a mask. And the settings for the combine node is the blend method, which is the default one with the 100% ratio. Alright, the next node is the transform node, which will let us move our landscape on the X and Y axis, as well as allow us to rotate it. And a very useful thing here is the scale, which will help us to shrink down slightly the size of the island so that we have more space around it. And it's useful in this case because we want to have some additional volume around the island for our seabed, but we have this really ugly kind of a border thing going on. So in order to mitigate that, we have our zero borders node, which will apply kind of a vignette effect around the island and will help with softening this ugly edge, and as well as giving the landscape this more gradual softening gradient, I guess, as the landscape is getting eaten by the sea. But this is of course optional, you don't have to use it. But anyway, next step would be to create those cliffs around the island, which I think it's really cool and it looks really nice. So that's the, well, not the end result, but one step ahead towards our goal. So as you can see, I combined the previous node with the effects node, which will elevate the whole landscape. So if we choose clamp setting and then raise it, you'll see the whole landscape is getting lifted. So let's stick with 5%. Later on, we might want to adjust those settings, and the great thing about this whole node workflow is that we can adjust all of those settings non-destructively, so we can go back and forth like working in kind of a substance designer style. So it's very handy. So coming back over here, we are combining those two landscape levels with the mask, which is comprised of the height information. So over here we are masking a particular height level, so we will have to adjust it slightly so that we can encompass this edge more precisely. So let's see, maybe move it slightly up, but not too much. 1% and 2% range is not precise enough, so let's try 0.5. Let's try with 1. That's too much. 0.7. Well, maybe it's gonna be enough. So we have additional mask that is plugged into the height, and with this mask we can control where exactly we don't want the landscape to be raised. So to better visualize the thing, let's go back to the combine, and if we pin it, that means that this node will always be, the result of this node will always be displayed. And now if we edit our mask by going to the edit mask, watch closely what will happen if I paint this mask. Let's go back. So we can control where exactly we don't want to see those cliffs. So that's a little back and forth process, because we are not drawing over here, but on the 2D view. So let's see, maybe soften those areas, those sticky ones a bit. And right now we can also decide where we want to maybe have a little beach or a bigger beach. Well, actually we can separate those areas. So maybe we can have one big island and the other smaller one. Why not? So let's say we'll have a little bay over here. Or maybe not. Maybe over here. Okay. Maybe lower this one. And at this point we can save it, either the original file or as a separate one. So that's a saving by increments. I use this one. Okay, let's move on, because we can also, as I said, we can always come back to those settings and tweak them later down the line when we see the big picture. So right now let's just more or less create an approximation of what we are looking for. So the next we have a blur node, which we cannot view because we have this one being pinned. So let's unpin it and let's take a look. The blur node, which doesn't work quite alright, because I believe we need to adjust the mask for the blur. So the white area represents where the effect of the blur will take place, and this mask is driven by the height information. So let's maybe first pin our blur node and let's go back to the height and just play with those settings and see what we can find out. And again, we'll have to play with those small decimal numbers. So let's try first 0.5, too much, 0.2, 0.1, not this one. Maybe we'll have to go over 1%, which might be too extreme, but if we go back to the transform node and maybe increase the scale, let's say by 20%, well, now our mask is being screwed a little bit, but maybe it's not that bad actually. Let's leave it for now, maybe position it a little bit better. Now our second island synced in, but maybe one would be enough. Okay, let's see, let's move on to the another part, which is optional. I have combined our base landscape with the mountain, actually two mountains. This is another one over here. So again, an optional step, but I think we can add at least one more mountain to create some more interest. So this is quite an easy setup. As you can see, it's just the mountain node with transform. So that's the original one. Then I shrink it down and position it and use auto level to increase its height. So let's pin this node so that we can see what we are doing, and let's transform this little mountain, and as you can see we can create very easily additional small island as well if we wanted to, but maybe let's just move it back to our mainland, maybe slightly bigger. And of course you can also mess up with those mountain settings, so could be less bulky. You can change the edge, so the mountain will be more soft on the edges, I guess. Change the scale of the, I guess, noise that generates the mountain shape, so you have different results. This one is not looking so convincing to me. Let's play with the shape. Let's stick with this one for now. And again, well, first unpin it, then move on to the next node. And let's transform a mountain. It looks kind of funny for some reason to me. Maybe a little bit bigger. I don't know, guys, I'm not quite convinced, but I don't want to fixate on being, too perfect about it. Because later on, as you will see very soon, the whole thing will start to take shape anyway. So if we erode it again with the wizard, well, first go back and unpin it. With the wizard erosion, as I said, the whole thing is starting to make more sense. And the things will start make even more sense when we plug in the C node, which will create those beach line and, ocean erosion all around our island. So we can play with the level. This is quite interesting. But you have to be careful not to, find a balance between how the cliffs are looking. Of course, if you want to have a cliff. But today we are going for this cliffy terrain. So the next settings is shore size, which will create bigger or smaller, well, shore. Maybe this is fine. Shore height. This is the, I guess, amount of aggressiveness of the ocean erosion. Maybe this is alright. Variation will not do that much. It will preserve more, those underlying details of the previous nodes. Well, actually, we can maybe shrink them down. So as you can see, the C node handled really well those little imperfection. If we go back, you'll see, the shoreline in some areas, like over here, for example, or over here, is not looking so natural. But again, if we apply the erosion and then another basically erosion, but of the different type, now it all starts to make sense and I think is looking quite interesting. Okay, so we are almost done. Actually, our Heightmap is, I guess, ready for export. The only thing that we have to do is to generate the splat maps, which are basically, you can think of them as a mask that tells the engine where to apply a particular layer. So one layer would be for the jungle and another layer would be the jungle puddles. But for now, let's go and export our Heightmap. So right click, mark for export, which I already did that. And if we go to the build, we can name our Heightmap. And the important thing here is to set the PNG extension, not PNG8, because 8 stands for 8-bit and PNG will save the 16-bit, high information file, which we need for the Heightmap. So that's PNG, normal build, that's fine. And another important thing here is the resolution. Gaea has resolutions for the Unreal landscape sizes. So 2017, that will be 2 by 2 kilometers map. That's 4 and 8. So I'm gonna choose 2K, which is 4 square kilometers. And all of the rest of the settings are fine. So let's save it to our tutorial folder. And maybe before we export it, let's handle those splat maps and export all the files, simultaneously. So the setup is super easy. I just use the height data node, which for the jungle layer is set to the height which would encompass, the area where the jungle could occur and makes sense. So that's slightly above the cliffs. And then I use it as a mask for the slope information. So the slope information is based on our terrain, and we are masking the height so that the slope is taking into consideration only this area marked with white. So for the slope I use 25 degrees with small fallout, and for the jungle puddles I use the same setup, with the only difference is that over here I'm using just 5 degrees because, you know, puddle will not occur on the more steeper areas, and you can, you know, argue that 5 degrees might be too much, but, you know, we don't have to be 100% realistic, and what matters is the final look. So that's it. Let's mark both for export. Let's go back to the build. So I already named it jungle splat and jungle puddles, and that's it. Let's click on start build and give Gaea a few moments. Alright, coming back to Unreal, we're almost ready to erect our island. But before we create a new level, first we have to make sure that we have two plugins enabled. One is the water plugin, which will create a nice ocean for us. And the second one is called Impostor Baker, which enables the billboard foliage for the trees, which will save quite a lot of performance for us. So after we enable those plugins, we have to restart the engine. So I already have a pack imported into my new project. So if we take a look at the main folder, we'll see we have an example level for the islands. And I could just create a completely new level and start from scratch, but instead I'd like to duplicate it and use all of the pre-existing lighting setup so that we save some time and we don't have to deal with that. So let's call it Island Tutorial and let's take a look. Alright, so this is the exact copy of the example level, and first thing that we will tackle here is the ocean. Right now the water is just the plane with the ocean material, which could work quite alright, but in my opinion the ocean that comes from the water plugin looks more interesting. So let's first select the water plane and either delete it or hide it. I'm gonna delete it, and I leave this little notification that says turn visibility on, so this is exactly what we're gonna do. So type visibility and tick visible and give it a few seconds to compile. Alright, that's better. Let's delete first the second island, or keep it if you like, but I'm gonna delete it altogether. And I believe the foliage is still there? No. Alright, that's fine. But anyway, let's delete a foliage volume for this smaller island and as well as those fog cards. Alright. Cool. And now we are ready to apply our newly created height map. So let's go to the landscape mode and import a new file, height map. So let's locate it. So I have my Gaea folder in my documents and I save it here. So what we are looking for is our height map. So let's try it. Let's import it. Alright, so this is our island. And as you can see, we have this funny glitch with the foliage. So we'll have to recompile the foliage spawner and spawn all of the foliage again. But let's actually first select the foliage and hide it for now. And the first thing we're gonna do is go back to our landscape mode and then go to the paint tab and let's reset all of the layers. And this is true only if you are following my steps, which are, you know, duplicating the pre-existing map. If you created your landscape from the scratch, then you don't need to do that. Instead, what you'll have to do is go to the material 03, which is the landscape auto material, and fill your landscape. So I'm gonna get rid of all of those layers which were applied for the previous one. So clear it. Okay, so this is a clean slate. Right now we have only our auto material applied. So let's take a closer look what we've got here. So as you can see, the cliff line is way higher than the ocean level, which might be not a bad thing actually, but I'm gonna lower the whole landscape to match the shoreline. So let's lower it. And as you can see, the auto material will place the beach shoreline automatically. So those two sand layers are being mapped onto the landscape based on the height information. So we don't have to, manually paint all of that. Although if you prefer more manual approach, then you are free to do it. In that case, you would have to open up the landscape material. So you can access the material by selecting the landscape and scrolling back till you see the landscape material. So let's expand this window a little bit, and you'll see that if we scroll down to the auto material section, we have this option of adding additional height blend. So with this setting and excluding material 2 from height blend mask, if we uncheck both of them, you'll see we have a just simple auto material without this height blended sand shoreline. And afterwards you can go to the paint mode of the landscape and choose material 4 and 5 for the sand and simply play with that. But let's go back to our automatic setup. And let's take a look. Honestly, I really like the results. I didn't expect it to look that good. But we have some problems with this area where the sand doesn't quite make sense being here. So either we go back to Gaea and adjust the height of this terrain in this area in particular, or just simply fill this area with another layer. But we have this little problem over here. The ocean is bleeding through. So maybe going back to Gaea and making few adjustments would be a better approach. Alright guys, I re-imported the tweaked landscape. So I think the landscape is looking quite spicy at this moment. If you take a look at our cliffs, you'll see those glitchy places, and this is just the normal stuff when using the generated height maps. So we can either go to the landscape mode and sculpt smooth those areas. So either we can do that, or we can edit our height map in Photoshop or GIMP or something, and we could smooth it out. But this is usually not an ideal approach because the terrain will lose also some detail, and usually this is not what we are looking for. But this is not that painful to go around the island and just tweak it and polish it, and maybe manually add some interest to the landscape to complement this generative approach. So we have our island, and the next step would be to add some foliage. But before we spawn our forest, we would probably like to apply a different landscape layers besides just this grass, which is fine. But if you want to have this tropical jungle, we would have to import our splat maps. If you remember what we did before, So next to the height map, we exported those two splat maps for the jungle and jungle puddles. But before we import them, we would have to edit them first. I use Photoshop for that, to basically adjust the levels so that we have almost only values between 0 and 1. So by default, the exported map would be a little bit grayish, and this is not ideal because the gray means it's the blend of the black and white, so that our layers would be just blended together and we want to make them look more distinguished. So I'm gonna crank up, maybe not too much, but quite substantially up. So I'm gonna do that with all of them. And now we are ready to import the splat maps. So in landscape mode, we go to the paint tab, and what we are looking for is first layer 06, which stands for our jungle forest. So we're gonna right click on this layer and choose import from the file and expand that and select our layer 06 and choose our jungle splat map for that. And for the jungle puddles, if we like to use this, that would be our layer 08. So that's puddles, and hit import. Alright, cool. Alright, so as you can see, we have our jungle layer applied, and the auto material handles the procedural generation of the ground underbrush as well as the grass, which is really handy and save us a lot of precious time. So now we are ready to grow our forest. But before I'm gonna do this and show you how to do that, I'm gonna clear some clutter over here. So let's get rid of all of those placed meshes, which we don't need right now, as well as fog guards. Let's actually hide them for now. Alright, cool, so this is our clean slate. So to use the procedural foliage volumes to generate the forest, we would have to first go to the edit and editor preferences, and in the search bar we're gonna be looking for, you guess it, procedural foliage. So tick it, close it, and if we hit G, the previously placed procedural foliage volume should be over here, and the second one for the beach rocks. Cool. But if you are starting from scratch and you have not duplicated this pre-existing level, you would have to go to simply window and then place actors and search for procedural foliage volume and drag and drop it onto the scene, and afterwards adjust the scale of it, so that would be roughly probably around 500 by 500 Unreal units, depending on the size of your landscape. And then we need to choose the foliage spawner, which in this case would be tropical forest. And all of the procedural foliage spawners are located in the procedural foliage folder. So one is for tropical forest and the other one for the beach rocks. So make sure you have tropical forest selected over here. And the final step would be to just hit resimulate. And this process may take quite a while actually, maybe even more than 10 minutes. And this is because the jungle forest has, I think, more than 60, trees and plants. So this is a lot of complexity to be handled. So just be patient. Okay guys, welcome back after the short break. So this is our lovely forest, and as you can see, the foliage is being spawned according to the landscape levels. So this is the grass, and if we go further to the jungle layer, we'll see this thick jungle forest. So this is really, really cool. And just like that, in a few minutes, we basically have this really dense environment, which feels quite alive, without, needing to manually do all of that. But if we take a look at our mountain, we'll see that the trees are spawning also at the top, which probably isn't the ideal situation. So we can go to the foliage mode and select, the tree, for example. And sometimes we cannot just select it. This is, I think, a bug on UE5, because on UE4, the foliage mode works flawlessly almost. So I didn't find any other better solution for that than just restart the editor. So I'm gonna do this. Okay, so let's try again to select, let's select all of the foliage and go back here, okay. And we can just start to delete those bigger trees, which doesn't quite make sense being there. Yeah, this is a little bit problematic situation, because after selecting just a few of them, I'm not able to do it again. Let's select all of the foliages. Go to the foliage mode. No, it doesn't work like that. So usually what I would do is, unfortunately, just, delete a few trees in key areas and just keep resetting the project. So this is one, quote unquote solution. And the other one that could be maybe better is to either, position the procedural foliage volume slightly down, so that if we go to left view, if we position it in a way that will leave the mountaintop not covered, then the foliage would not spawn there. But this is also not an ideal situation, because in that case, all of those smaller bushes and rocks and plants would not be spawned here. So, this is a little bit of a trade-off with the procedural approach. Maybe in later versions of Unreal, this thing will be fixed, but for now, this is what it is. We could also go to the window and place actors and search for procedural foliage blocking volume, and then drag and drop it onto the scene. And adjust the scale, so maybe 50 by 50 by 20 by 20. And we can place those blocking volumes so that if we recompile the procedural volume for the jungle forest, the forest would not be spawned inside those volumes. But overall, I think it's not that bad anyway. So I'm quite satisfied with the result, and maybe just for a little fun we can spawn inside the forest and just walk around. So let's choose spawn in the current camera location and hit play. Awesome, really cool. When I am creating those words, I really appreciate this, immersive mode of just walking around and get the feel of the environment. So we have our forest, and next thing we can do is to go back to the procedural foliage for the beach rocks. So that's this square, and scroll down and resimulate the procedural rocks. And this should take, half a minute. It will be much, much faster than a spawn in a forest, okay? So, this is our nice coastal area. Really nice. And again, I use this procedural volume that encompasses the whole island in all places. But if you want to have, areas where the beach would not be covered with those rocks, then just simply, again, place the procedural foliage blocking volumes, or you could also split those volumes onto a smaller, chunks. So you would go back to the scale and let's say type 200 by 200. So that would be a smaller volume, and place it over here, then place it, maybe over here, and just like that, you know the drill. I'm gonna undo it. So we are basically done. This is the part where we could art direct also the whole scene. So for example, if we select the directional light, we could change the position of our sun. So you would be looking for the side of the mountain that you would like to, expose to the light. And if you're gonna move the sun, you would probably also want to move the sky sphere accordingly, so that it matches the position of the sun. So let's rotate it into the direction of our sun. Maybe here. And also, the very cool way to enhance the atmosphere of the scene is placing those fog cards. So I'm gonna make them visible and maybe delete the rest and just keep one. And then position it, scale it, rotate it. It's really a nice touch, which adds some realism to the landscape. It's very subtle, it's hard to notice almost, but it's there. Sometimes we may not see something, consciously, but our unconscious mind is picking up on those little details. So those little things that are not so obvious are playing quite a big role. So I'm gonna place those fog cards in different areas. And if you like to control the thickness of those little clouds, you can go to the details panel and open up the material instance for the fog card. And there are a few settings, but the one that you'll use the most is probably the fog opacity. So if we go to 0.3 or 0.4, the effect is much more pronounced now. It's probably too overboard, so I'm gonna stick with 0.1. And after all, this is a sunny day, so you would not expect to have a thick clouds anyway. And the nice thing about these fog cards is that if we come close to them, they will start to disappear. So according to the camera position, their visibility is diminishing. And I think this is a really nice example, looking at this side, what difference it could make if we enable or disable those fog cards. Again, it's not much at the first glance, but it definitely adds some depth and interest. And I think the last thing that I would like to share with you and show you is a little gameplay level design element. So if we go back to landscape and then paint mode, and then scroll down to the material 07. This is the landscape level that will paint the forest path. So let's shrink down the brush size. 2 strand is fine. So maybe I'm gonna first hide the foliage. So I'm gonna select it and hit H to hide it. And let's say we would like to guide the player to some areas. So let's go back to the paint mode and maybe first decrease the strength so that the path would be less visible over here. And as it climbs up and go to the jungle, it's gonna be more prominent and visible. Maybe let's adjust the brush size. I don't want this path to be too wide, so maybe 200, which stands for 2 meters, would be more appropriate. And while holding Shift and painting, I can paint back or erase this layer. Okay. And the auto material is handling those small ground foliage so that wherever I place the path, the grass would not appear there. We would have just, some roots, small plants and, debris. Okay, I think this is enough for the demonstration. So, for the forest to respect our new layer, let's unhide it by hitting Ctrl and H. We would have to spawn again the jungle forest. So I designed this procedural volume in a way that would not make the trees spawn at our path. So hold on a second, I'm gonna re-simulate the thing. Alright, so our forest is ready, and as you can see, the trees are not being spawned on the forest path. Really cool. I really like this very contrasty lighting, really nice. So the procedural foliage spawners are designed in a way that respects the different landscape layers, so you would not have the trees on the forest path, as well as, on the sand. And the procedural foliage spawner for the beach rocks also respects that, so it would not spawn rocks in a forest or on the grass. So you can really design your landscape almost in full procedural mode without having to spend so much time in manual work, and instead just complete, building your level in basically no time. And before we wrap this up, I actually would like to show you just two little more things. I think they're important enough to highlight them. So I'm gonna show you another landscape layer. So go to the paint mode, and I designed a third beach sand layer which gonna place automatically if you're gonna paint this. Those little foliages as well as those dead palm leaves. So it's really cool addition to paint this layer around those coconut palms. That's another touch of realism. So that's that, and if we open up the content drawer and go to the meshes tab and type cliff, you'll see we have a different type of cliffs. So we have those jungle cliffs as well as those coastal cliffs. So I'm gonna place them and maybe scale them up, position a little bit, and let's try another one. And this one. So if I go closer, you'll see how they look up close. So this is a nice way to enhance the coastal area. And if you want to go for the realism, you could also go to the landscape mode and then sculpt tab and sculpt, maybe increase the brush size first and sculpt a little bit, the seabed around them, like that. I'm not gonna do this perfectly, it's just a little demonstration for you. And I'm gonna show you just very quickly the other cliffs. So these are the jungle cliffs, and maybe the good place to place them is next to this big cliff. So just drop them. And as you can see, they are already covered with plants and foliage, so you don't have to decorate them manually each time you place them. So this is, another handy stuff in your creative arsenal. So you have quite a lot of, options to design your level. Alright guys, that's it for this tutorial. Thank you for sticking by to the end of this video. And if you are interested in purchasing the pack, you will find all the links in the description. And I encourage you to comment, share something, ask any question you like. And please also like and subscribe to this video to help me create more content like this in the future for you. And until next time, have a great day. Cheers guys. See ya.